This episode is brought to you by Commerce, parent company of Big Commerce, Feedonomics, and MakeSwift.
I believe our purpose is really the purpose of all of our purposes, I guess, on some level, is to, in some way, engage and sell, which means we have to give you some positive predisposition to want to go to us versus somewhere else, or to buy our product instead of another product. To make that happen creatively, you might have to reveal some truths that might hurt some people in the process. And if you're smart, that'll be a small percentage. But it's the revealing of the truth that we're looking for as the great piece of advertising, not necessarily the controversy.
Welcome to Retail Remix. Retail advertising has been making waves this year, and while yes, I am referring to the now infamous Sydney Sweeney American Eagle campaign, it's not the only retail ad that has caused a commotion in 2025. Celebrities and sometimes controversy have always been a part of advertising, and there is perhaps no better person to speak to that than today's guest, legendary New York Adman Ellis Verdi. Not only will Ellis help us dissect some of the biggest advertising moments of the year, but he also offers a valuable historical perspective on retail advertising strategies over the last 4 decades, what has changed and what remains the same. With all our eyes turned to the impending holidays and the Super Bowl shortly thereafter, now is the perfect moment to take a deeper look at how retailers are successfully connecting with today's audiences. Welcome back to Retail Remix. I'm your host, Nicole Silberstein, editor-in-chief at Retail Touchpoints, and I'm joined today by Ellis Verdi, founder and president of the New York ad agency DeVito Verdi. Ellis, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your agency, specifically your work over the years with retail.
So we started the agency almost 40 years ago, and the first account that the agency had, literally the first one that gave us some attention and visibility, was a business called Daffy's. Daffy's is an off-price retailer. It's from New York, but it expanded under our tutelage and help. And so we really had a very strong campaign for them. One that was not only strong for them as being a local retailer, but also one that kind of made waves because it changed the dynamic of how to advertise in the retail world. That then led to a lot of other retail work. And we have a list of, a good 20, 30 different retailers across the time period we've been working in advertising.
What was it that you did so different with the Daffy's ad?
So at the time, retailing was really not an account that anybody wanted. And why did they not want the retail accounts? Because they would generally price an item advertisers. They would go into newspapers, get this sweater at a 20% discount, or they would use circulars. Circulars were incredibly popular back then. And it was an environment in which nobody really wanted to touch it because it didn't really persuade people conceptually about the brand. You weren't in an everyday commit. Even an off-price retailer, which has an everyday posture in the marketplace for value, you saw them go and be very aggressive about price and item and promotional work. And we put that all aside. Today, we call that down funnel to some extent, but we put that all aside. And we said, what is the idea? What's the concept here? And we put all of our work and all of our ideas against the concept. And the concept for Daffy's is you're basically paying too much if you go to a department store or somewhere else. So you're not being smart if you go elsewhere to buy clothing because we are selling brand names for less. And that is a conceptual sell. It doesn't say I have this. And by the way, it's really important for off-pricers because most of them can't talk about the brands they have. They can't talk about Armani or the fact that they're selling a very high-end brand. They have to talk conceptually, but they weren't bought into the power of concepts. And we moved away from price and item. We moved away from promotional work, and we just used concept, and it was incredibly successful. People felt that Daffy's was the place to go. The lines were out the door. And our advertising, which is the second most important thing, it wasn't mild. It was quite attention-getting. And in many cases, it stirred up controversy. In fact, very serious controversy, some would say.
Oh.
And that was also a very good, we had just to give you a little piece of controversy, we had a straitjacket. If you're paying over $100 for a dress shirt, maybe we suggest a jacket to go with it. And it shows straitjacket, which, by the way, is what I consider the perfect form of advertising. But we had demonstrations. We had the Alliance for the Mentally Ill, one of the largest lobbying groups in the country, started to do demonstrations in front of the store and on the streets. It went even further than that. They sued us. We had to defend ourselves. We got out of that, and it became a huge news story across the country. I mean, the demonstrations had our faces. The agency started, and we have our faces on placards with people walking on the streets in front of our agency, in front of Daffy's. It was essentially the start of our agency. When someone says, well, how did you start? I said, we started with kind of a bang. And that was the start of the agency because it was so strong and so powerful, and it was very interruptive.
Yeah. I mean, it feels incredibly relevant, that story, just given everything this year with Sydney Sweeney and American Eagle. I want to talk to you about that. But before we get there, I want to just get your historical perspective, because you're talking about something that happened 40 years ago. It feels very similar to something that happened this year. What in your mind has changed over the last 40 years about the ways that retailers connect with consumers? You talked about what it was like when you first came on the scene and be very price focused. Has that changed, and what has stayed the same?
It's a good question, because on one end of the spectrum, where I'm closer to where I believe is the stronger argument, is that our vehicles have become more involved, more complex, more interesting, and in some ways more targeted. But the basic conceptual work, the basic idea framework remains the same. And that is the part that's the salient part. This is so, yes, when you talk about a promotion or 20% off, or you get a very powerful message out there. Now, whether you do that in a print ad or circular from the past, or you do that online with a banner or whatever you're using, it is what I call a down funnel message, but it is also an important one in the mix. The question is, what's the mix look like today? The mix is really what the challenging question is of the moment. Is it all conceptual, 90% conceptual, 10% down funnel, or the reverse? And I would say we're in a position right now of going way too far towards performance marketing. And most of the quote unquote scientists, the people that study this, would agree that it's way too far. And the balance has to come back to the real world, which is especially important in retailing, because concept in retailing is now in some ways more important than it ever was. And there are reasons for that, partially because there's so many differences between these big retailers in what they offer in some ways. Yes, there's similarities, but there are also big differences. Amazon has a very different way to go to market than a bricks and mortar retailer. A Kohl's is a very different animal than a Macy's. And therefore, there's a view that we have that there needs to be a rebalance. And I think the rebalance is happening right now. So yes, the same things existed from the past as exist now, but we are in an imbalance. We need to rebalance where those priorities should go. And that balance was lost primarily because the online folks, the Googles, the Facebooks and stuff, were trying to monetize their business by pushing and promoting very much down funnel activity over upper funnel activity.
And when you say that we've gone too far performance, are we talking about like more demonstrative advertising, the kind of creator stuff you see on social media, like this is this product, this is how I wear it? Or what do you mean by performance?
Performance is anything that's directly related to proving that the 10 cents you spend results in 30 cents return, for example.
Okay.
And a lot of that comes from the nature of Facebook, the nature of some of the other offerings that are in the marketplace. But we've also seen that you increase that 30 cents to 60 cents and you're not getting the same return on advertising spend. So it actually doesn't necessarily improve the matter so much. And in fact, you're losing the ability to communicate a brand. And a brand is so important. Why is a brand important? Because basically, Nicole, you're thinking about buying a pocketbook. What's the first place you would think about doing that? What comes to mind is going to be more important than any other decisions that go along. Are you going to run to the Amazon? Are you going to go to Macy's? Do you have an idea of how much you want to spend? There is stuff that's happening in your mind with a predisposition that we help to construct by doing advertising. We help, and some people call it today mental availability, but it's a top of mind awareness, a predisposition that we've given you through the right advertising so that we tailor where you go. And that's changed over time for a lot of reasons, a lot of dynamics. People who don't want something delivered immediately would rather go to Amazon. They may give up on some things. It's a balancing act of all the three key factors that drive people's interest in buying have been balanced and are rebalanced every time there's new players, especially big ones.
Yeah. How much do you think social media is playing into this kind of imbalance now? Or is that just part of...
It's another tool. There's a lot of aspects of social media. So when you speak social media broadly, it's fair. And in some cases, it's incredibly important and useful. In some cases, not so much. The most important thing I think that we see is when user-generated content is selling a product. Like if you go on TikTok, I may know that TikTok has commissioned people who sell the product, and they're very successful sellers. It reminds me of the old days of direct response advertising, where it's very powerful. And the reason it is because it uses the most powerful tool in advertising, which is demonstration. I put some cream on my left cheek and the right cheek. Look at my left cheek is better than the right cheek. Whatever the message is, visualizing it, it's being demonstrated to me, and it's a person or a user. And you can't disregard that power. But I'm thinking about a cream to buy, and I'm not sure, and I want to think about, and I have an idea what I want. That type of advertising may not be enough, and probably isn't. You have a lot of choices out there. You can pick from a lot of different places and so take it back some. If you're not in that heavy sell direct response mode, you need to use other tools. And that's why I say it's a balancing act. Is how much do you put on the top and how much you put on the bottom, and how do you spend your money? How do you go to market? It's a balancing act. And it's a balancing act, as I said, also that's tremendously imbalanced right now. And it's going back.
Where are you seeing it come back now?
Well, I like some of the things I see. So not many, but I do see some of it. So when Levi's did the thing with Beyoncé, I thought that was smart, because it tied together perfectly with the use of an expensive personality in the process.
And a cultural moment, too. It was tied very much to a cultural moment, bringing their product their brand into that.
Yes. And it was associated. There's so many uses of famous people that are just totally disconnected from what you're trying to sell. And they think they're going to get attention because they're using that. So that one was very connected. And there are a few examples now, but I'm also seeing in terms of media mix modeling and spending money that in general, brand is starting to come back versus down funnel and performance.
Yeah.
It's very much returning. The down funnel, I think Nike, New Balance, these are folks that put too much money in. I think they're recorded as saying that they put too much money in down funnel, and they decide to go back to brand marketing because that's where the real results come from. So there's plenty of brands that are seeing it, and retailers are seeing the same thing.
Retailers are entering a new era, one powered by AI and filled with opportunity. But they shouldn't have to go it alone. Meet Commerce, the new parent brand uniting BigCommerce, Feedonomics, and MakeSwift into one AI-driven ecosystem, connecting all the tools your business needs to adapt faster, scale smarter, and grow with confidence. Commerce's powerful selling solutions help brands turn data into discovery, create storefronts without bottlenecks, and build frictionless shopping experiences that your customers will love. Want to learn more? See how Commerce is powering what's next at commerce.com/retailremix.
Another one that really strikes me from a branding perspective lately is Walmart. And they are not a retailer that has historically focused on just touting their brand and their kind of like ethos. They've been a very much like down funnel price focused retailer. And they've this year been coming out with a series of ads, the Walmart Who Knew ads promoting their marketplace selection. They seem to be, maybe for the first time ever, really focusing on brand image over at Walmart. And I found that really interesting as well.
I do. I think that that's actually another great example of a large retailer. They operate with the strongest existing brand, or one of the strongest existing brands, I think we can all agree, in retailing. They own the most important aspect of retailing, which I always describe as value. That is something they own. In other words, a lot of people need to work like crazy to make that, but they own that. Now, that doesn't mean they shouldn't keep feeding it, and they do now and then feed the value proposition in all kinds of ways. But because there's a degree of ownership of that, they can go into other areas and drive a lot of personality as it relates to Walmart. We don't want to think of going into Walmart as being a boring experience. We want to make sure that we think it's a familiar and interesting experience. And sometimes just advertising at the level they do provides that kind of feeling that it's not going to be just a need, it's going to be a want. And you want to go to Walmart. You don't just want to pick up your groceries or do whatever you have to do. You also want to go there to visit. Everybody is also fighting for those wants a little bit.
Yeah, especially right now,
Yeah, which is really true. I mean, on the other hand, like TJ Maxx, from a want standpoint, I think succeeds in a big way. It's a highly successful retailer for many, many years. It's an off-price communication, so the value proposition for them is also pretty well known. But it's not something you don't absolutely need a shirt necessarily at that moment. It's kind of a little bit of a shopping experience. But shopping experiences in general are getting a lot more interest. I don't know if this is interesting, but Colette is coming back. It's a famous place in Paris, and Fashion Week has happened. And Colette is decided to reopen. And that is a perfect example of a retailer that's purely on want and not need. They are just an interesting, extremely interesting, over-the-top interesting place to visit. You would go there as if you would go to a museum or something else. That's how different it is, but it's reopening. So there might be some cultural interest in things that are a little more interesting places to shop, not just something I have to pick up tomorrow.
All right. Well, so speaking of cultural interest, let's talk about the big moment of the year, the Sydney Sweeney American Eagle moment. I mean, this is something that made headlines, speaking about your Daffy. I mean, it wasn't just in America. This made headlines beyond America, the whole conversation around it. It was kind of an up and down type of thing. Like, it's great for the brand. It's terrible for the brand. Oh, wait, no, it's actually was pretty good for the brand. So what's your take on that whole thing and how it played out?
It's a very good point, because there are a lot of people that look back on it and give you all kinds of opinions, pro and con, right? In other words, you're hearing people that say that business was never better. Other people are saying it was destructive. I am net positive on it in the end of the day because, well, first of all, it's very hard to stand out in a crowded environment. So they get points for that, right? They definitely stood out. They did associate a certain amount of the character that they had in the visual, the personality, with the product that they're selling. To some extent, it wasn't totally a disconnect.
Right. It wasn't a random celebrity. She's just famous, so she's going to be in our campaign.
It wasn't totally random. It was selling product. I thought that it was talking about their product. It was showing their product. It was talking about their product. By the way, showing product, talking about a product, and not using price and getting a lot of people's attention in and of itself was a challenge.
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing to do, and they did it. And they didn't have to produce a lot of work to do it. They did it in short order. It's hard for me to talk about the people that saw that idea politically or took a different take on that. I have never done a piece of advertising that was strong or good, didn't get some kind of reaction. In fact, I was a little unhappy if I didn't get one. So it was, and almost everything we did got some reaction. And, when you do something pretty good, you should expect it.
Yeah.
You really should. I'll tell you why, because there's a certain amount of truth in what you're doing when you do it well. A certain amount of truth. It comes from some truthful aspect.
Even if it's an offensive truth, potentially.
even if to some people there's offense, but the question is, what's the offense? You don't want to offend for the sake of offending. That's definitely off the table for me. But you want to deliver some degree of truth. And whenever you say something truthful, people will be touched in some way, and some people won't be touched positively, and you will get some reaction. It will be always, though, almost always, you can count up the negatives because they will always be the most outspoken, but there's a hell of a lot more positives that don't talk up. So if you were to really look at the percentages, I think you don't want to imbalance it because there's a loud minority, and while the majority really are pushed by it and is pushing the right buttons. I don't want to exaggerate the negative impact simply because there were some pretty loud moments for them.
Yeah, I guess I can kind of already tell what your answer will be to this. But one thing I did want to ask you is, can there be value in causing controversy? Are you a proponent of the idea that no publicity is bad publicity?
No, actually, my answer is, if an advertisement is created for the purpose of causing controversy, it's probably not good enough.
Okay. So controversy for controversy's sake, no.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the reason for that is not related to the controversy. It's related to the fact that that direction in the creative process will usually yield not something very good from a selling standpoint. I believe our purpose is really the purpose of all of our purposes, I guess, on some level, is to in some way engage and sell, which means we have to give you some positive predisposition to want to go to us versus somewhere else, or to buy our product instead of another product. To make that happen creatively, you might have to reveal some truths that might hurt some people
Right.
in the process. And if you're smart, that'll be a small percentage. But it's the revealing of the truth that we're looking for as the great piece of advertising, not necessarily the controversy.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, at the end of the day, the job is to sell things, right? So if the controversy is getting in the way of that, then you're not spending your money wisely on your advertising.
Yeah, and I would say that you will find that that is more rare than you think when the controversy gets too much in the way. It is more, our experience is we have so many controversial campaigns, not just in retail, across the board. We had the biggest First Amendment case at the time because somebody took down a bus ad. We've done so much work that has always caused something, and most of the time, it's because we were very honest and truthful and maybe a little in your face, but at least something that said something that was selling something and that our intentions were really not about controversy. Our intentions were about selling.
Yeah. I don't want to let you go without talking about another one of your ads from the early days for Macy's private label fashion brand I.N.C, which this year is now celebrating its 40th anniversary. And that ad featured a really famous face who honestly has somehow throughout her career kind of avoided being too controversial. But tell us a little bit about that original campaign for I.N.C and also what you may have noted about like private label retailer owned brands over the course of your career.
Sure. I'll just take a little side note. My most loved commercial, maybe my number one, I'm not sure I showed it, but is this commercial for a private label product for a retailer called Meijer. Meijer is a very large Walmart-style retailer, and it's a private label product. It's spinach, and basically a young girl tastes spinach that's not Meijer private brand, and then tastes Meijer brand, and she goes, yuck, to both of them. And so there's no difference except for the price.
Oh, that's so clever. I love that.
Thank you. It's really one of my favorites, private label. Before I get into I.N.C, which I like a lot, but that is probably one of my most favorite. Anyway, I.N.C was a terrific assignment. They had seen all our work on Daffy's and various other things, and they wanted us to work on I.N.C. And at the time, they hadn't done any advertising. They had introduced the product. The product was out for a little while, but it was starting to grow, and it was starting to go into different areas of product and product mix. It was kind of beginning to become a hit. So we went to work, and we actually were looking for a particular talent that would give us a terrific visual. And we, at the time, found Heidi Klum to do the commercial for us.
Very
but Heidi
good visual.
Klum is not, but Heidi Klum is not the Heidi Klum of today. Famous. It was far less famous, but it had a great visual. I'm not sure how far I can go with describing the visual, but it was a great visual. And it was important to get that kind of visual with the kind of clothing that we are selling, which is stretch pants for women. And it was a dog, starts to pull on a fire hydrant, pulls it right out of the earth, trying to follow her because she looks so great. And that spot was enormously successful. When they write about Macy's in general, as they have, that spot comes up a lot.
Yeah.
And so it was incredibly successful. We had a great client, and we did more work for Macy's, but that's just one of the spots that helped kind of launch I.N.C beyond its original sort of product launch into a different sort of stratosphere.
Yeah, an actual brand. I mean, and when was the Meijer campaign? Was that also a while ago?
Not as long as I.N.C, but a while ago. I'm trying to think of when it was. I'd have to figure that out and get back to
I'm
you.
just asking because I think there's been a lot of talk the last couple of years about private label brands are on the rise, and this this is a wholly new thing. And I think both of those campaigns kind of showcase the fact that it's not really, that maybe there's a moment right now where consumers are consuming more private label. That also has a lot to do with the economic environment. But this idea of promoting and turning private label into a brand in its own right has clearly been around for a while.
It definitely has. But generally speaking, private label as a true sub-brand or brand within a other retail environment has always done well. For some time, there's been a question. Okay, so here's a question that relates to private label. Is it almost a better quality product than what's on the shelf that happens to be the same amount of money or less? Or is it just exactly the same product for less money? And so you understand there's a little bit of a difference. So part of the private label push in the past few years has been to give private label its own quality advantages. So by giving it its own quality advantage, it's no longer just a price point communication in terms of saying that this is a better product. And that perhaps is a little bit of a change over time.
Okay. All right. We're just about out of time, but I don't want to let you go without doing our mixtape rapid fire segment. So I have a few quick, fun questions for you to end things up here. You ready for those?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, I think the first one you might have already answered. So the first one is just your favorite retail ad that you've worked on in your career. Is it the Meijer spinach one or is there another one?
I think the straightjacket one, which was early on that I described to you earlier, was probably one of my favorites. And it is 3 ads that might compete for it. And the other one might be the spinach commercial. Those are the top 2, let's say, in our career. Yeah, there's other, I'm thinking about many others, but we did a billboard for Daffy's. And the billboard was just a sliver of space on the right-hand side. And it said what 80% off actually looks like. So you're driving and you're looking through this whole billboard. It's empty except for this little sliver at the end. And I would say, remember how I said demonstration is so important?
Yeah.
This was the ability to demonstrate and actually advertise at the same time.
Yeah.
So maybe that's my third one.
Yeah. What is a retail brand that you think is really hitting the right tone right now?
Well, I think I said I like what the Levi's did with, and it's not necessarily the only thing out there. I don't really have a belief that the retail community has come back around to doing great work. It just hasn't. It really is going to start because branding is becoming so much more important today. It's really been stuck in how do we compete against Amazon mentality. That is mostly a down funnel activity. But I think now when you think about, price, selection, and service being the 3 things that you have to communicate on some level, that people are finding a way to balance that communication properly and give people some unique aspect in a broader context, which I would call brand advertising. It's not necessarily also a position to say I'm giving up, because you can't give up, or you really have to compete. And we have a lot of these retailers have a lot to compete with. TJ Maxx has a lot to compete with.
Yeah.
They have a lot of ammunition on their side.
What is your preferred ad type, humorous or sentimental?
I think that in retailing, I would say not funny, I would say smart and witty and staying close to the product are the best tools you have available to you. The best tools of staying close to the product or service that you're selling, being witty, making it clear that you are unique enough that the voice that you're giving to it is something that nobody else has. Those are the characteristics for the best work in retail.
What, in your opinion, is the primary reason to watch the Super Bowl? The game or the ads?
Well, I think about that for a second, and I say to myself, if it was a great game and there were no ads on one side versus I was going to see all these great ads, but the game was really lousy, I think I would go for the ads and the lousy game over the great game with no ads. That's because my whole life I've been in the advertising business, and it's certainly a display of work when you see it. And it has a lot of other characteristics that make it interesting for an advertising agency or advertising people.
Well, and just the ads are always consistently at least interesting. The game isn't always consistently interesting. There's a lot more factors at play.
That's fair. But you have to say they're both available to you, and that gives it incredible ratings every year. So you have best of both worlds, at least for an advertising person. Or you could have the best of both worlds.
Last one is your top tip for retailers looking to break through the noise heading into holiday. That's interesting. Or just in general today, if that's easier.
Well, I'll try to talk to both. The biggest fear is fear itself. And when you approach advertising, I would say don't be so concerned about what your work product is going to be and make it so acceptable that it's not acceptable or it's not interesting. And so we used to say the biggest risk you can take is not to take a risk. I think everybody's overused that terminology or that thought process. I do think, though, that there has to be some understanding that marketing has to go to a new and different place. Communication has to go to a place that you may be a little uncomfortable about because you're not expecting it. The best work that you could look at, that you can do, is when you look at doing something that's not expected, or that we say we do what the client needs, not necessarily what they expect. Because what you want to do is you want to do what they need. In other words, we want to do some work, and this goes for CMOs looking at work up to top leadership, but you also don't want to be not surprised. The element of surprise is terrifically important, as it would be if it was going into the marketplace. And fourth quarter this year is I think the value proposition, as always, remains the strongest proposition in the marketplace, even though service has been delivered by Amazon quite well. Selection is there also with Amazon, and they're doing a good job with that. I think the value proposition, no matter where it comes from, will be still the strongest. So look for those retailers that communicate everyday value, and I think you will have a successful retailer for fourth quarter. Those are the people that are like the Walmarts, TJ Maxx, and some of the ones we know. It would not be the high-low players like Kohl's as much. It would not be the high-low players that we see elsewhere. And you might see a little bit of a comeback in the dollar store world a little bit. For example, I'm very interested and I'm very excited about seeing what Family Dollar is doing. They just starting their own thing, and there's just a lot of great potential in value and communicating in a way that doesn't feel cheap.
Well, there you have it, guys. Thank you for being here today, Ellis. So many great insights and stories. Loved it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And thanks to all of you for joining us. The conversation doesn't have to end here. Hop over to the Retail Touchpoints page on LinkedIn and chime in with your own thoughts on the best or worst retail ads this year and other topics that you'd like to hear about in future episodes. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you all soon. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Retail Remix. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. Until next time, keep mixing it up.